Bloodline, El Salvador. Chapter 10. Lydia gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The proud father named his son Juanito in honor of his mentor and best friend, Juan Carlos. Juanito began his life among deteriorating social conditions in the San Fernando Valley. Manuel and Lydia moved into their first home, purchased under Lydia's name in a relatively affordable section of the valley called Van Nuys. Van Nuys used to be a pleasant neighborhood. The neighborhood's tree-lined streets had an old-fashioned 50s feeling about them. One could almost imagine stepping into a Leave It to Beaver television set while driving through town. This all changed, rapidly. A sea of Central American and Mexican immigrants inundated the valley. The majority of them were poor people escaping abject poverty, vicious civil wars, or a combination of both. Because of the huge influx of single men seeking work, the family institution began eroding. It seemed that Van Nuys was regressing to tribalism as gangs of youth participated in an increasingly violent crime wave. With their sense of community gone, neighbors became introverted and slapped bars on their windows and doors. Home values plummeted as droves of California natives beat a hasty retreat to anywhere but L.A. The neighborhood's transformation from pleasant to derelict happened in just a few years. Juanito was growing fast, and Manny and Lydia got comfortable in their home, maybe a little too comfortable and a little too complacent, as they were soon to find out. Their next-door neighbors finally got fed up and moved out of state. The people who bought the house had no intention of moving into a transitional neighborhood. They rented the place out. 2 young couples moved in, a common phenomenon in the San Fernando Valley, where the cost of rent was going through the roof. They seemed like nice enough people, but Manny started noticing an awful lot of strangers coming in and out of the house. Both he and Lydia didn't like what they were seeing. Juanito was almost 7 years old and couldn't be kept cooped up in the house 24 hours per day. They began making plans to get the hell out of Dodge before the inevitable bad things started happening. Juanito was developing into a pretty fair soccer player. Manny enrolled his son into a city league and thoroughly enjoyed hanging out at the games, watching the little kids play ball. Juanito became an avid pro soccer fan as well. He begged Papa to buy him all his favorite teams, sports paraphernalia, and team clothing. His friends at school nicknamed him Futbol, the Spanish name for soccer. Not a day went by when Juanito wasn't wearing some professional soccer team's jersey. As Manny had observed, his new neighbors were nice enough young people. Frank and Angie and Freddie and Marissa couldn't have been over 22 years old. They were already saddled down with 2 or 3 kids. They appeared to work regular jobs on occasion, but there were quite a few dry spells in between when both couples were laying around the house for weeks on end. It was during one of these dry spells that Manny noticed an unusual number of cars cruising down their street and stopping at the neighbor's house at all hours of the day and night. There wasn't a whole lot they could do about it. As Manny cynically observed to Lydia, "Calling la policía isn't exactly an option for us now, is it, mija?" Frank and Freddie had both attended San Fernando High School in the same class. For the most part, they had stayed out of trouble. Somehow, they had managed to avoid the gangs plaguing the area. For friends, they had their crew, a group of guys who hung out drinking beer, smoking a little weed, and maybe snorting a few lines of coke or meth when they could afford it. The problem with growing up in L.A. is trouble always seemed to be within easy reach. Hip nightclubs abounded in nearby Hollywood. Frank and Freddie's crew loved to hang out in the clubs that turned a blind eye to identification and other societal limitations. All it took was money to have a good time, lots of money. Seeing how Frank and Freddie were party animals, it became apparent to both of them that sources of cash needed to be found somewhere. Forget the allowances that the more affluent suburban kids received. Both Frank and Freddie's parents were barely scraping together enough cash to cover basic living necessities. Frank's parents and Freddie's mom held down 5 jobs between them. Freddie hadn't seen his dad since he was 2 years old. He had no idea what he even looked like. Needless to say, there wasn't a whole lot of adult supervision during Frank and Freddie's formative years. Their nascent drug-dealing business was the same old story. They bought large enough quantities of weed, methamphetamines, and a little coke now and again to sell to their friends, with enough profit built in for their own personal stash. This worked out fine in high school, but right after they graduated, both of their girlfriends got pregnant. Frank theorized that one of their batches of weed was laced with some kind of fertility drug. Freddie failed to see the humor in his friend's observation, particularly when the reality of having 2 mouths to feed plus his own began to set in. Steady work for a Los Angeles man without a trade paid about $6 an hour in the late 80s if you were lucky enough to land a steady job. The proliferation of illegal migrant labor in the Los Angeles area depressed the prevailing wage an unskilled worker could command. This depressing microeconomic formula computed to a lot of downtime for guys like Frank and Freddie. Unfortunately, Frank and Freddie's landlord didn't respect this particular microeconomic fact, so rent had to come from somewhere. Actually, their San Fernando high school experience had provided them with a viable trade, but a trade that society frowned upon. Out of the microeconomic forces of necessity, they began to expand the trafficking business. Soon they were meeting all sorts of interesting people. The girlfriends weren't exactly thrilled with their new lifestyle. Interesting people weren't necessarily nice people, and the girlfriends were understandably concerned about their children's welfare. Meanwhile, for Frank and Freddie, the baby, or babies, needed shoes, figuratively speaking. Rent was due in a few days, and no one in the household had a job. The state of home economics wasn't looking good. They started scrambling for cash. One of the golden rules of recession economics is to exchange one's remaining assets for alcohol. So, Frank and Freddie headed out for the corner bar to shoot a couple rounds of pool and power down a pitcher or two. Their old school chum Pete was already renting one of the bar stools. "Que tal, homeboy?" greeted Pete lazily. "You seem a little slow, Holmes. What you been doing, picnicking on lewds?" "Fuck you, Frank," laughed Pete. "No, man, I almost got carved up last night. I met some crazies down in East Los and spent half the night pleading for my life. Crazy-ass motherfuckers." "Are you serious, dude? What's up with that shit?" "Well, I went to a party in the city, against my better judgment, of course. Fucking L.A. is an accident waiting to happen, you know what I'm saying, Holmes? Anyway, there's these serious vatos hanging out, giving bad vibes to anyone checking them out. Hey, what am I supposed to do? Pretend they don't exist? Fucking A, I'm gonna be looking at all those scars and twos and crossing myself while I'm doing it. So this one evil-looking motherfucker with a serious ding on his cheek gets right up in my face talking smack in Spanish. You know me, my Spanish ain't the best, especially under duress. I had no idea what the fuck he was talking about. Anyways, he pulls his knife on me and puts the blade right up my nostril. I was tripping, dude, big time. So I tell him, hey, chill out, vato. I'm just here to score some weed, you know what I'm saying? Just when I thought I was going to turn into fajitas or some shit, homeboy's smarter brother comes running up translating for my scared ass. So Satan, or whatever the fuck he was, lowers the knife. He still wanted to cut me up, I could tell. Fuck, I never saw so much evil in one set of eyeballs in my life. Homeboy who spoke English said that he was watching me dealing weed to the homies. He started bragging about how much shit he was holding. He told me they ain't about nickel and diming, strictly wholesale. He was talking serious shipment of pounds. I told homeboy I'd love to do business, but I ain't carrying that kind of coin when I'm out of my hood. So he asked me if I was serious or just bullshitting to pass the time of day. He said if I was serious, he'd give me his pager number. He said if I was a cop, he'd had fucking Satan over there finish up the job. It was one of those situations where I just couldn't say no, you know what I'm saying, Holmes? I took his fucking number. Pete's story was getting Frank and Freddie interested. Very interested. Frank asked, "You didn't happen to save that number, did you, Pete?" "Fucking A, that motherfucker's burning sixes into my leg as we speak, Holmes." Freddie gave Frank a long, thoughtful look. Mind reading wasn't necessary. They were both thinking the same thing. "So, Pete, my man, how much cash you holding? You serious, dude?" "Has a heart attack, vato. Me and Frank here are in some deep shit. We don't get the rent up, me and the kids will be banging on your old lady's door." "Maybe we can talk, but I ain't having that happy-ass Lucifer motherfucker over as my house guest, and that's a fact." "Hey, don't stress, Max. We can do the deal at my crib. Everyone respects my old lady, even Satan. Homegirl's meaner than a junkyard dog." Over the next couple of days, Frank and Freddie managed to raise $7,500 from various interested investors among their friends still living around the neighborhood. It was enough money for 5 pounds of Mexican grown, with a street value of about $16,000. Frank paged the wild man's rational friend using the number Pete gave them. Juan called back a few minutes later, and the deal was made. The following Wednesday, Enrique and Juan headed north on the 405 freeway toward Reseda at about 7 o'clock in the evening. They met their prospective buyers as planned in a golf course parking lot. Juan sauntered over to the buyer's van and leaned into the window opening on both elbows. Frank was driving with his partner Freddie riding shotgun. Juan talked to Frank for a few minutes and then walked back toward his car. He had dropped a baggie with a sample of the marijuana onto Frank's lap. A few minutes later, the van pulled up alongside Juan's car. Frank jumped out and walked up to Juan's window. "It looks okay, bro. Does the rest of the stuff have as many buds as your sample?" "We wouldn't fuck with you, homie," responded Juan. "How we gonna get repeat business by burning you, huh?" "Easy, Holmes, easy. We don't want to get the wild man back there all worked up," he said, motioning his head toward Enrique sitting in the back seat. Enrique gave him a baleful stare as if he understood the implied barb. "Tell the wild man that we think he's a real cool cat." With a laugh, Frank turned on his heel and walked back to his van. Enrique demanded in Spanish, "What did that puto say about me, Juan?" He said that you're a real cool cat, Enrique. That means you're one badass dude. He really respects you, man." Satisfied with Juan's answer, Enrique slumped back into his seat and clicked the safety of his 9mm semi-automatic Colt back on, having been fully prepared to pump a few rounds into his prospective buyer over a perceived insult. Juan closed his eyes in meditation, thinking to himself that this may be a very long night. The van slowly pulled out of the parking lot with Juan following. They headed east on Van Owen Street toward Van Nuys. At Sepulveda Boulevard, they turned left and drove to a residential area just north of Sherman Way. The house was a typical San Fernando Valley rambler built in the 50s. The house had been poorly built in the 50s and had deteriorated greatly since then. The other homes in the neighborhood hadn't fared much better. The van and Juan's car pulled into the driveway. Juan carried in a Ralph's grocery bag with several coffee cans sealed with plastic lids. The front door opened into the kitchen. 2 babies were crawling on the filthy kitchen floor. Frank told his wife to take the kids out of the kitchen. She didn't have to be asked twice. Angie scooped the children up and hurried out of the room, glancing furtively with ill-concealed dread at Enrique's evil presence. Juan set the grocery bag down. He took 2 of the coffee cans out and handed one to each buyer. The buyers pried off the wax-sealed lids and peered at the contents inside. Nice Mexican green bud, Holmes. Fuck it, I'm sold. Get the cash, Freddie, said Frank to his partner. He looked over at Juan and said, "So, you got the Mexican X, La Familia, in the old country, vato?" Juan responded, "There ain't no Mexican familia. Nosotros somos Salvadoran, carnal." Freddie went to another room and came back in carrying a navy blue duffel bag. He carelessly tossed it on the kitchen table. The duffel bag slid neatly to Enrique, who eagerly ripped the zipper open and dumped the contents of the bag onto the table. Stacks of rubber band-bound $100 bills came tumbling out of the bag. Enrique's eyes lit up in awe at the sight. "It's in bundles of 1,000, Holmes," said Freddie. Enrique didn't require a translation for that statement. He and Juan sat down at the table and began meticulously taking the rubber bands off of each stack to verify that there was indeed 10 $100 bills in each stack. After he had finished, he looked up sharply at Juan and said, "There's only $7,300 here. ¿Qué pasó?" The buyers looked nervously at one another. Finally, Freddie said, "Hey, listen, we're a little short. It's all we could come up with on such a short notice." Juan translated this to Enrique. The buyers were typical second-generation Hispanics. They could understand Spanish, but couldn't speak it. Enrique stared down at the floor at Freddie's feet for a long moment, his black eyes gradually hardening. Without warning or rising, Enrique whipped out his pistol and fired 2 rounds on either side of Freddie through the kitchen door. Freddie stayed frozen in position, his arms defensively wrapped around his head. Jesus Christ! Chill out, wild man! Jesus Christ, you're fucking loco, Holmes! Frank had dived under the table and was cowering on the floor. Motherfucker, Jesus, you're fucking out there, Looney Tunes! Take one of your fucking cans back. That'll take care of your 2 bills. We gotta bail. Cops gonna be all over this place. Jesus! Juan grabbed the 2 cans that Frank and Freddie had been inspecting off the table. Fuck you, S.A. We're taking 2 cans because you fucked with us. We ought to blow your shit away. Frank put his hands up in a calming gesture from under the table. Chill, Juan. It's cool. It's cool. Take the 2 cans. Fuck it, so long as everybody's happy. But hey, you gotta bail, dude. If the cops catch us, nobody gets shit. Juan looked at Enrique and said, let's take the cash and run. Let homeboy here deal with the heat. Enrique nodded and backed toward the table, his gun still trained on Frank and Freddie. He motioned to Juan to get the cash. Juan hurriedly crammed the bundles of $100 bills into the duffel bag, and he and Enrique quickly walked out of the newly ventilated front door. Enrique turned back with his automatic still drawn and ordered Frank and Freddie to lie down on the floor. Don't look up, and maybe I won't put a bullet in your brain, maricon, he warned in Spanish, then strode quickly out to catch up with Juan. They got into the car and headed west toward Sepulveda Boulevard in the 405 freeway. Meanwhile, inside, Frank and Freddie were scrambling toward the back door with the cans of marijuana. Bring the van around back, Freddie. We don't want nobody to see us loading this shit. Freddie ran through the kitchen and forced himself to walk through the front door. He pulled the van around back, and they threw the grocery bag into the van through the side door. Take the stuff over to your dad's house, Freddie. I'll deal with the cops the best I can. Freddie didn't need to be invited to leave that mess behind. With the gunshots and all, he was surprised the neighbors hadn't gotten the police there already. Okay, dude, I'm gone. I hope we never see those crazy-assed wetbacks again. After Freddie left, Frank found his wife and kids hiding in the bedroom closet. The children looked up at him shivering, their dark brown eyes big as saucers with tears streaking their dirty cheeks. His wife rushed up and hysterically hugged him. I thought they shot you, Frankie, she sobbed. It's okay, baby. Listen, you gotta help me clean up the kitchen. If the cops come, they might search the place. His wife numbly nodded and followed him into the kitchen. She swept up the kitchen floor and emptied any ashtrays to make sure there were no marijuana roaches left in them, while Frank inspected the bullet holes in the front door. Damn, he cursed. There ain't shit I can do about this door right now. He opened the door and peered anxiously across the street. It was at that moment that Frank saw the small prone figure laying face down across the street. He yelled aloud in dismay, Holy shit, that fucking wetback hit a kid when he shot through the door. His wife came rushing up to see. Oh my God, Frankie. Oh my God, I think it's the little boy next door. What are we gonna do? Just stay cool, baby, said Frank in a shaky voice, trying to sound more calm than he actually was. Call 911, and I'll go see if he's still alive.